Got a comment coming in from Rob J. And then I'm going to make one of the most obvious statements in the world, but I'm going to make it anyway. So he says wide receiver looks nice, but can Cade get it to them deep without missing them? So I'm on Twitter a couple hours ago, and I see somebody cut up JJ McCarthy clips, and specifically the top end of the reel was against Georgia even.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I watched this, and again, this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, and it's pretty obvious, but I thought, I don't think Cade McNamara can make any of these plays that he made against Georgia. Like he threw a ball down the right sideline that I believe, and I was looking at the score was at the bottom of the screen. This is when they're getting murdered. And he hits for a deep pass down the right sideline. Then I thought they were like inside the 10 and they had to go for it on fourth down. They didn't score. But anyway, he hits that. I think McNamara can make that pass, but McCarthy makes it with a flick of her wrist. McNamara's stepping into it. He's letting her fly. And then he threw a couple balls that were lasers that, again, this is in the Georgia game. I know he didn't throw too many passes, but I had forgotten about these throws. He threw a couple deep slants. I'm talking like 20, 22-yard throws downfield, and you could tell the Georgia guys, they thought they had a beat on it, and he split defenders. And then he also had two runs where he was deep in the pocket and had to spin out. And so he's rolling and he's 12 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he still gained a lot of yardage against a fast Georgia defense. And I thought, maybe I don't want to go crazy on just watching a couple plays, but it was against Georgia. And I thought maybe they do need to just say, as soon as you're healthy, let's go.
It's tough, but like we talked about last week with Ted Ginn, it just looks different. It just looks different. And I am a fan of Cade, of just how he played and all that, but it just looks different with JJ. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage it, but I would imagine you're probably looking, with the out of conference of potentially at that time making that change. If you are going to make it, I think that needs to be the time to make it. But it looks different with JJ. It just, like you said, flick of a wrist. The guy could scramble, he could run.
And I don't know if the Georgia defenders weren't fast enough or they got accustomed to chasing Cade for the first three quarters or whatever it was. Well, McCarthy, some of these highlights were late first half anyway, to where you could just tell, again, they weren't taking the right angles on him. And again, this is two runs that I'm watching, but still there was just a decided difference between the two skill sets, no doubt about it. Then the other thing that came to mind was watching these Georgia clips that, I watched quite a bit of Georgia defense last year. I watched the Clemson game. I watched the Arkansas game, the two Alabama games, of course, some bits and pieces against some good teams, Kentucky, Tennessee, those teams. And Jordan Davis was obviously the guy everybody knew about from day one. Then in addition to that, Lewis Seen is a player. Man, that guy can run and hit like a ton. Darian Kendrick, the corner they got from Clemson, really good player. He's going to go pretty high in the draft. Nakobe Dean, there were plays against Michigan, shot out of a cannon across the field, tracking down Blake Corum. Even Devontae Wyatt was the other tackle opposite Jordan Davis that I thought late in the season, okay, he's actually playing better than Jordan Davis. I never, in watching all those Georgia games, and I'm not watching them like a scout, like watching the 22 film and let's scout this guy. I'm just watching a football game. The name Trayvon Walker never crossed my mind. I never thought, okay, wow, look at that play he made.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part because, as athletic as Georgia's defense was overall, I mean, you had guys everywhere. You'd still like to see the potential number one pick pop on the screen, even with, surrounded by athletes everywhere, you'd like to still see him pop off the screen. And for me, I'll say the same thing. I mean, I watched Georgia against Alabama. I watched them in that Clemson game, and no, if you told me I was watching the number one pick on the field, I mean, I probably would say Jordan Davis ran like a 4.40, and that's the guy. Like that would be the one. It wouldn't be Trayvon Walker, unfortunately, but not say he's not a great player. It's just to me, he didn't pop off the screen.
Yeah, he must be a great player. And as you well know from following this as closely as I do, there are your game tape heavy guys that performed on the field. Then there might be some questions once they got to the combine and the Senior Bowl, and the scouts really nitpick what they want out of the measurables versus your guys that underachieved on the field, but they're workout warriors and the measurables are crazy. And some teams determine, hey, we can be the ones to unlock this potential and make this happen.
Yeah, give me the guy all day, every day that the film looks like a player. That I will take that every day of the week. I mean, you see it every year with a wide receiver, a corner who runs a 4.3 and is so fast, and that alone boosts his draft stock. But for most of those guys that run extremely fast, outside of Chris Johnson, those guys don't end up playing football all that well. I mean, you had Corey Coleman was one that was really fast. John Ross was really fast. Yeah. And I mean, those guys, there's just very different things of just running in a straight line for 40 yards. That's almost never going to happen on a football field.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they do this each and every year at the combine. They will show a list of whoever you consider to be the best wide receivers in the NFL, and they'll show their 40 times, and it's really not. There might be one guy that popped, but the rest of them, your AJ Greens and your Antonio Browns and so forth, and they run down the list, and Julio Jones, and they're good. They're not like at the bottom, but just to show you, okay.
This isn't well, it's funny because they show that, but then teams still end up overdrafting a fast guy. So it's like, hey, we're trying to tell you this isn't everything, but it's the allure of having that guy potentially, the GMs get in their mind of all the different ways we can get him the football and he'll outrun everybody, and it just typically doesn't work that way. I would love to if I were a GM, and I'm not, but if I were, it would just be, yes, the combine is there to just verify what you think you saw on tape.
Yeah.
Like, it's not there. You shouldn't create a new narrative based off of, 2-3 days in Indianapolis. It should be, hey, I saw this guy play against Ohio State. I saw this guy play against Georgia, played a high level and consistently. That's the guy that I'm drafting, and you go from there. But, hey, what do I know?
Because how many guys are marginal college players and then they turn into great NFL players? And usually there's a story, there's a reason behind it. It does happen. I know that Travis Kelce didn't have some great career at Cincinnati, or George Kittle at Iowa. I looked that up recently because I thought, I don't remember George Kittle that much at Iowa. And I looked him up, and I think he had 20 catches, like 2 different years. And I thought, well, this is probably Iowa not utilizing him correctly. And I think he got banged up to their defense. But yeah, usually I just have to think that we know that the SEC has the highest percentage of future NFL players playing. If you flip on any SEC game other than Vandy, and then the Big Ten's next, but they're all at a certain rate of high percentage of NFL players, that if this guy was this good for, let's say, 2 straight years of starting at whatever position against guys that are either going to get drafted or get a serious look in the NFL, I got to think that over 2 or 3 years that means something more than the guy that showed out at a workout.
You would like to think that, but we see it all the time where, guys are drafted, and it's a wild thing. And a guy that kind of comes to mind for me is Odell Beckham Jr. And, he's one that, with being an Alabama fan, I obviously watched him all the time not all the time, at least once a year in that game. And he was always a really solid player. But when he was drafted, I think it was 11 that year in the draft, 11 or 13. I thought it was a reach. I'm like, man, I guess I didn't see that. But when he got to the NFL, he was a guy that was
Sure.
just on fire. He's probably one that I guess I would say surprised me a bit, and maybe it's just because he went to LSU. I was jaded a bit in how I viewed him, but I think part of his issue, and same with Jarvis Landry, was their quarterback play. They could never get a solid quarterback there with those two dynamic weapons. But yeah, Odell was one that I would think, and even him, I wouldn't call him a marginal college football player. Like he was really good,
Sure.
but I didn't see what I think. What do you have in the first 4 years, the most receiving yards in NFL history? I didn't see that at all.
Yeah, he wasn't Devontae Smith or Garrett Wilson or whoever, fill in the blank, in college. He was really good. Like, I knew who he was. I watched him. I thought he was like really good, like an all conference kind of player. But yeah, I didn't anticipate like doing backflips one-handed and all that. I didn't see those catches in college. Maybe they existed. Maybe he did them against the Citadel or something. I don't know, but I don't remember him doing that. Tons of people in the live chat, and we'll wrap up here in just a second, have jumped on the JJ versus Cade conversation, as you would expect. And, it's easy for me to sit where I'm sitting saying, yeah, play JJ. He's more dynamic. There's more upside and ceiling. But I realize that's a delicate situation that would have to be handled in just a delicate way, because you got a guy that won the Big Ten championship and did everything was asked of him. And, does he get benched for, like, if they start the season, they're going to win the games. They're not going to be losing for a while. And if he's doing his, I just threw for $180 and a touchdown and 15 to 22, that's what I was asked to do. If that's going to get him benched, and he probably shouldn't on one hand, but if you want to pull the Dabo and go for the gusto and win the national championship, or, max your, I don't think that they can win a national title, but max out their potential, then we know who the guy is.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's delicate. I'm not quite sure how you do it. Is it a rip the Band-Aid off and maybe I don't know, but I know Harbaugh's track record, and the starting quarterback is going to be Cade for at least week 1. I feel very confident in that, of just how Jim Harbaugh has just always operated. And maybe it's you split time. I think probably the easiest way, or maybe just a way to do it, would be maybe 2 series for Cade to start, even week 1. 2 series for Cade, 2 series for JJ, 2 for Cade, 2 for JJ. And there's always going to be people who don't like that approach, but if it's going to be 2 quarterbacks, I guess that's a way you could approach it. But I'm sure we'll be on the stream, and some people won't like it, and I may be one of them. We'll see. Who knows? But that's a way you could do it, and then you could potentially say, well, JJ was more effective in his drives, and so on and so forth. And it's a difficult situation. I don't think there's a perfect way to handle it, but
No.
I think the better quarterback is JJ, but not being healthy in the spring is going to be a huge Achilles heel for him in his potential of being the starting quarterback.
Blank name, I threw out $180 and a touchdown, but those were kind of arbitrary stats. But at the same time, that's if you look at the bulk of the season, that's pretty representative of what we're looking at. He threw 15 touchdowns in 14 games. So there you go.
And I'm pretty sure, didn't he have a multi-touchdown game against Michigan State?
Yeah, somebody noted in here he was great against Michigan State, and that was the one game that I thought, okay, yeah, man, I've never seen him play this well. He threw in a lot of tight windows, and he was on fire that game.
Yep.
So absolutely.
And that was, well, oh man, it's difficult, but this is why Jim Harbaugh gets paid the big bucks, is to make these types of decisions and do what's best for the team. And I think the only saving grace is that essentially sports is not fair. It's just not. The best guys play. Whether you're, if you're in high school and you're a senior and there's a young stud sophomore that lit it up last year, and hey, sorry, and appreciate what you've done and still want you to be part of what we're doing, but that's how sports is. The best guys play, and that I would imagine some form of that will be happening with JJ over Cade, but we also kind of assumed that a little bit last year, and that didn't happen. So we'll see.